Audio. Okay, there it is. Mike should be picking it up now. There we go. All right, for real this time. Good morning. Welcome to the Division of Drinking Water webinar for June 20th, 2018. I'm Colt Smith. We have with us today, we're going to talk about harmful algal blooms with Ben Holcomb from the Division of Water Quality and Michelle Deras from the Division of Drinking Water. We'll kind of go over how those two programs work together and how they both address them separately and what that means for drinking water in Utah. Start off, we have always some house cleaning items to go over, if this will work with me. Quick reminders, it is lead and copper sample season starting now. Start looking at that if you're a community system or a non-transient, non-community system. Look and see, double check WaterLink to make sure that this is not a year that you have to do lead and copper samples. Also, DBP sampling starts July 1. Start getting that in mind. Traditionally, this has always sort of been over the summer month, but when the rule specifically states that it's the hottest calendar quarter of the year, which is July 1, running through September. So keep that in mind. Seasonal startups. If you're a system that opened in May or June, make sure that you've done the seasonal startup form on our website and submitted that to avoid a violation. If you're a community water system, your consumer confidence report are due to be submitted to the Division of Drinking Water on July 1st. That needs to go to DDW reports at utah.gov and have that in by then. We'll be running compliance on the 10th of July, I believe, this year. July 16th, there's a rural water training in Logan. July 19th, there is an AWWA small systems training in Brigham City. And August 14th, there's a rural water training in Green River. Check the rural water or the AWWA websites for more information on where those are being held. August 27th through the 30th is the Rural Water Fall Conference in Layton, Utah. Start looking to register for that now. It's a great way to get CEUs for certified operators as well as stay current on what is happening with water in Utah. Additionally, that it will be an operator certification course taught at that one. So if you're an operator who needs to be certified, look at signing up for that then. Some news. So we have many new staff here in the Division of Drinking Water. Matt Wyckoff just started in the rules section and is now the lead and copper rule manager. Zane Tomlins started with the permitting section as a plan review engineer, as did Cheryl Perkins in the permitting section as a plan review engineer. Haley Schaefer is a new administrative assistant and Marie Owens gatekeeper. So now whenever we are trying to book and manage our time with Marie, we have Haley there to make sure that we get it, and great additions all around. Some headlines. This is not really for you as the regulated community, but we have something called the Data Managers Users Conference. It's a big conference every year for people who use the primary software that we use to regulate and run all of our rules, and we're hosting it here in Salt Lake City. And so I only put this out there as a note to let you know that July 9th through the 13th, there's going to be a lot of staff sparsing in the rules section. So if you're trying to get a hold of someone and you find that it's hard, know that we are all heavily involved in that during that week. We'll still, of course, try and make ourselves as available as possible, check emails, and the like, but just know that there is likely to be a very skeleton type crew here at the Division of Drinking Water that week. There's staff vacations, of course, throughout the summer. We are all human. We do need to leave the confines of this office periodically and get out. And so just keep in mind that if you're having a hard time getting a hold of someone here, they should have an auto reminder set up on their email and voicemail. Probably not actually on the voicemail. None of us are really going to go through and do that. Like I'd love to tell you that we're that on top of it, but we're not. But email, we're pretty good about the email thing. Know that we are leaving. In fact, I'm out of here starting tomorrow, and I will not be checking my email. Requestcap.utah.gov is still up and running. If you if you need a corrective action plan for a significant deficiency that was identified on your sanitary survey this year or during a level 1 or 2 assessment, know how to fill that out. Get in touch with our office and learn what you need to do to fill out a corrective action plan. All right, with that, the chat room, of course, is up and running and is live for questions. That's not what I wanted. And so I will monitor that and can take questions through the chat room. It's the only place we can do it, through the chat room. And I will turn it over to Ben to start.
Okay, Ben. Great. Thank you for the opportunity for me to discuss what the Division of Water Quality is building. This is still a relatively new program. We started this this program back in 2014 when a bunch of agencies were staring at each other, wondering what each other is doing about it. And so that led to some discussions and some guidance documents and some response plans. And we're much better prepared today than we were 3 to 4 years ago. So I'm going to just cover broadly what the state of Utah does to address these cyanobacteria harmful algal blooms. I'm not sure how familiar most of you all are, so I'm going to go into a pretty basic 101 of what these are. So cyanobacteria have been here since the beginning. They're some of the oldest life forms on the planet. So they're a natural thing. They're not an invasive species that we're just now seeing and popping up. But due to local and global changes, we're starting to see them increase in frequency, in abundance, their duration, the magnitude. And so they're popping up on our radar more and more. And with that, new technology has been emerging from that. And so we're also better able to detect where they are, how big they are, how toxic they may be. So there's some nomenclature that gets to be, it's unnecessary, but it's what we have in front of us. So basically we hear of algae. These aren't algae. They are actually bacteria, but you know, we've carried forth nomenclature to just house them under the confines of algae. But they are similar to algae in that they use photosynthesis to create their energy. So they use the sunlight to build their cell structures and reproduce and so forth. However, like I mentioned, they are a bacteria, so they're prokaryotic. They don't have the internal cellular structures that a eukaryotic cell has. So they are different than plants. And then they both can form these large blooms when conditions are right. And so cyanobacteria are really flexible. They can, you know, we find them anywhere from the hot springs in Yellowstone National Park to the Antarctic. So they can live in any type of environment, but their preferred environment is when we have lots of available nutrients so that they have these building blocks to reproduce, warmer waters, abundant sunlight, and when those kinds of ingredients are there, they can form these blooms. The problem with that is when they form these blooms, they also have, they can produce toxins. So not all blooms have toxins, depends on the strain that happens to develop in that water body at the time. But there's a whole host of cyanobacteria that we see in Utah. I've got on your screen a list of 5 common ones that we see. And these tend to be the ones that form large blooms. So Dolichospermum used to be called Anabaena. It can produce a number of different kinds of toxins depending on the strain. So microcystin is one type of toxin. It can affect the liver and other digestive organs. Anatoxin A is another one that it can produce, and it's a neurotoxin, and it can act quickly. It used to be called a very fast death factor. I guess that name has been politically corrected to Cyanotoxin A. And it can also produce saxitoxins, which are generally known as like a shellfish poisoning toxin. We have microcystis, and its primary toxin is microcystin. And the interesting thing with microcystin is that there are different congeners or different molecular structures associated with microcystin, so that it has so many different variants that's difficult to pin down exactly which variant may be produced by that particular strain. So depending on the type of test you're running, you need to be congener specific. So right now I have listed on here, this is probably from earlier this year, last year's slide, I had 100 congeners. Now I know there's at least 120. These go up by probably 10 to 20 every year. We're just finding more and more different congeners. Cylindrospermopsis isn't as common here, but it's emerging more and more. This used to be a subtropical cyanobacteria. We are starting to see it in places like Utah Lake, Deer Creek Reservoir, and I think that's where we've been limited to finding it here in Utah. Nodularia is an interesting one. It's very similar to Dolichospermum in that it has these longer threads. It's more of like a filament, but it's found mostly in brackish water. So we find it in the bays of Great Salt Lake, like Farmington Bay and Bear River Bay. And then Aphanizomenon is a common one. I'm sure we've all seen it. It looks kind of like grass clippings on the water, and it can also produce a host of different toxins. So not just one cyanobacteria produces one type of toxin. It really depends on the strain that's emerging in that water body. So there's a lot of different ways that we humans can be exposed to cyanobacteria and cyanotoxins. Primarily, it's through incidental ingestion or dermal contact while we're recreating, or incidental inhalation. So, for example, if you're jet skiing or water skiing or behind an airboat, you get this, the toxins can be aerosolized and you can inhale them that way. And the receptors generally are most susceptible population is young kids. So, they tend to be, smaller in size. They have a less developed immune system. They tend to ingest more water accidentally. And so that's really what sets the baseline for how these, our thresholds and standards have been developed. And so these toxins have a lot of different kinds of endpoints and how they can affect us. I touched quickly on like how they can affect our liver and kidney and digestive system organs. There can be some reproductive organs that could be affected that are less known, or the causality is less known. I mean, there are some interesting studies that have been coming out making linkages to these effects, such as cancer and other developmental aspects. So broadly, our program, our goal is to be able to have the basic resources to respond to these events. Our primary goal is to inform the local health department, particularly on incidents that can affect the recreating public. And then that data is also shared with other agencies like the Division of Drinking Water, for example, Department of Ag and Food is another that, they all have their own separate and distinct stakeholders and user groups that use water in different ways, but can still be affected by these blooms. And the way that we communicate, there's a number of ways that we receive reports or incidents or notifications on suspected blooms. So we use our 24-hour spill line. So that's 801-536-4123. Additionally, we have a Bloom Watch app that you can download at the link that's on my slide. Additionally, you can contact me personally if you're having a suspicion that your source water is having a bloom, or if you notice any other water that's having a bloom, contact me, and then we'll set things in motion. Our primary method for informing the public and reporting results is through our website, habs.utah.gov. And there's a lot of information there on Basics 101, what we do, what support we can provide, and how we may be able to help you. So broadly, here's our process. So as I mentioned, there's a number of ways that reports can come into us. Because cyanobacteria aren't 100%, can't identify them just by observing them in a perfect way. We go out and we'll do some initial screening tests. We want to validate that is in fact a cyanobacteria bloom. And then once that's occurred, then it sets off an incident reporting system. That's through our spill line report. And that will alert the respective agencies that are in that geographical area, or statewide on a larger scale, whether it's affecting particular agencies. And then that sets in motion coordination internally with those agencies on who can collect the sample. We'll go ahead and do the assessment and analysis of once the data come back to us. And then internally, we'll also coordinate how this information is disseminated, not only across agencies, but to the public. And so that process, I should touch back on this. So this process can happen anywhere from within 24 hours to within a week. So there's a broad range of variability there, depending on how quickly samples can be collected, how quickly they can be analyzed, and then how quickly we can organize our communication. So, we can't be everywhere all the time. So we've created a way to prioritize vulnerable waters. And so we've identified waters where there's a high likelihood of exposure, and those waters that have a high likelihood of producing excess cyanobacteria. So we prioritize monitoring those kinds of water bodies, and then we do a lot of coordination with local entities. There's well over a dozen or two agencies that we coordinate with. I've got a few listed here. We also work with USU Extension through the Utah Water Watch. It's a citizen monitoring program where they'll go out and they'll target specific water bodies on usually every couple of weeks. And then we also have water quality buoys at select water bodies. We receive near daily satellite interpolation through federal partners. That's been really helpful at screening. And then we also have other mechanisms like fixed wing aircraft imagery that we can deploy as needed. So how do we test for these things? Well, first we'll go out and we'll visit the water body and collect a sample. It's different than how we normally collect samples. So we're not trying to find average conditions. We're really trying to target kind of a maximum likelihood of exposure. So it's really targeting kind of not necessarily like the very worst case scenario. So we're not looking for like an isolated spot that the public can't be exposed to, but we're looking for areas where the public can be exposed, and it's generally the worst looking spot. We'll collect the sample there, and that'll be analyzed for the phycology. So that will identify the cyanobacteria and it'll count them. And then we can also run a strip test for the cyanotoxins, and these strip tests can test for 3 different toxins. It takes about an hour. They're pretty simple to run. You have to just do a little bit of pipetting and waiting, but you can run multiple samples at a time or different toxins at the same time. And if we get any positives from that, then we'll forward those samples to our local labs. So the state has 2 labs that can analyze for Cyanobacteria, Anotoxin A, and microcystin, and they use an ELISA testing mechanism, and that can give a little bit better quantification than the strip tests. And there's also some other tests that are available depending on how specific you want to quantify that particular toxin. So there's mass spec, and qPCR, for example, is another. It's a surrogate for a toxin. It can give you a better heads up of when toxins may be produced. So with our Department of Health, we've formulated some toxin thresholds and cyanobacteria cell count thresholds. We've developed these thresholds based off of generally the World Health Organization, other nations, and other US states. And we've tried to take a really balanced approach with our thresholds. So we have 4 indicators that we use to issue an advisory, or that we recommend an advisory be issued. So DEQ doesn't have the jurisdiction to close down any specific water bodies, but we make a recommendation to the local health departments, and they can make that decision. So we have cyanobacteria cell densities that we use. So whenever they're greater than 20,000 cells per mil, we would recommend a warning, and that generally means that to avoid frequent primary contact recreation. So things like swimming, water skiing, jet skiing, and so forth. Boating is fine, fishing is fine. Also, there's microcystin. That's anytime it's greater than 4 micrograms per liter, or cyanobacteria is greater than 8. And because anotoxin is a neurotoxin and that it's so easily disrupted in the environment, it's difficult to detect in the first place, and it can quickly disintegrate within hours. So it's difficult to know just what quantity may be there. We don't have the technology yet to really know on a real-time basis how high and how low and how long it'll last Anotoxin A. So our recommended level is, once that's detected, that a warning be issued. Toxins like microcystin can persist much longer in the environment, up to weeks. And so even if a bloom is not present there, that could just generally mean that the cells have already broken open and the toxins are now available in the environment. So you can't use observation alone. And so it's often a good idea, if you are going to collect a sample, to just run a microcystin screen anyways. Here's our decision-making algorithm, and it's generally just taking the steps that I've kind of talked about and putting it in a decision diagram in a format that's kind of more easy to understand if you take the time to look at it. But I'm not going to go through this in detail. It's essentially saying that whenever any of these thresholds are breached, the respective advisory is recommended. And then we go back and we visit these water bodies on a weekly basis. And we recommend that at least 2 weeks be consistently below the threshold before the advisory is lifted. As I mentioned, we coordinate with our partners whenever these events occur. So the Division of Drinking Water has their own guidance and response plan to help individuals like yourself, and the same way Department of Ag and Food has a similar response plan respective for their stakeholders. So with that, I'll turn it over to Michelle, or I can answer any questions if we want to take a little break.
Any questions?
There's not any questions, but if you have them, we can.
I'll be standing by.
Yeah. You got it, Michelle? Or?
Wrong way, Michelle.
I'm done.
Oh,
Do you have any questions?
You're good.
Hello, I'm Michelle Deras, currently working for the Division of Drinking Water. I've been here about 6 months now, and some of my responsibilities now that I've joined the division is surface water treatment. I'm a lab liaison, so any laboratories that have questions, they can work through me, and then handling harmful algal blooms for drinking water purposes. So Ben covered a lot of the basics of cyanobacteria, algae. You know, is it a bacteria? Is it an algae? Some people are very passionate about the answer. Other people don't really care. Like he mentioned, the common name for all cyanobacteria is now algae or blue-green algae. So to keep things simple, we just call cyanobacteria algae or blue-green algae. The unfortunate thing is the media think that all algae are harmful algal blooms, and we'll discuss a little bit more of that. So cyanobacteria, it's kind of a love-hate relationship. Some people actually buy cyanobacteria for health benefits, and some people post signs on a drinking water body saying it's toxic. So that goes back to what Ben discussed on there are certain strains of cyanobacteria that do produce toxins. So what does a harmful algal bloom look like? In the drinking water industry, people that treat surface water, dealing with algal blooms is not uncommon. And this is something that drinking water systems had to troubleshoot or battle in the drinking water process for a long time now. Have some of these blooms become larger, more consistent, more impactful? Maybe. The trouble is, like Ben discussed, you cannot decipher if an algae bloom is a harmful algal bloom just with the naked eye. That requires some microscopic analysis. And so deciding between a harmful algal bloom and what the drinking water industry is used to dealing with, which I'll refer to as nuisance algal blooms, they can look the same on the water body. So like I mentioned, both are impactful. Nuisance algal blooms, they can produce taste and odors that impact drinking water treatment process. Most customers don't really like the presence of algal blooms on their source waters, or if it produced taste and odors, they don't like the smells of some of the algal blooms in their drinking water. But a harmful algal bloom can impact not only recreation aspects, the public health recreating and in drinking water, but also the drinking water treatment process. So what happens if a nuisance algal bloom becomes a toxic algal bloom? And then how do you know if that algal bloom is actually toxic? Well, you would do a toxin analysis. And while cyanotoxins is not a new term in the drinking water industry either, however, the analyses or the capability of monitoring toxin levels is more of a new technology. So there are, like Ben mentioned, different toxin analyses that you can perform. The toxin strips would be more of the qualitative analysis. That would be just a quick check to see if the toxins are present and at like what level. And those are dependent on what the strip test can quantify that out to be or qualify it out to be. The ELISA test is a more in-depth test of a total toxin analysis. And then there is a more expensive detailed test, which is the triple mass spec process. And what that does is, while there might be over 100 different types of toxins, there have been standards made for the most commonly monitored or researched toxins, and it can look for those specific toxins. So where can you conduct these analyses, or how much does it cost? Like I said, some of this technology is relatively new, and I think it's only been available in mainstream marketplace for about 5 years now. Not all labs are equipped to do this type of monitoring, and luckily in Utah, we have 2 labs locally that can do that type of monitoring. But for water systems, especially water systems that are at high risk for treating drinking water of sources, there is some in-house monitoring that you can conduct. I threw together this table of what type of analysis, like the strip tests. You have to purchase these strip kits. Like I said, it's more of a qualitative result, but it's a great precursor or a trigger type analysis. Once you hit a certain level in your source water, then you might want to, send off for more detailed sampling, or vice versa. If you want to look at your finished drinking water only, if you get some type of hit on the strip test, then you might want to send it to a lab for more detailed analyses. The strip tests, typically, if you purchase a kit, the tests run about $25 per test, and it's a simple test you can do in-house. The ELISA test is a little bit more complicated, still can be conducted in-house if you have trained staff. The training of the staff is kind of, the test is sensitive to each staff member and just basically how well they perform that analysis consistently. But that's something that you can do in-house. It has kind of a large capital cost, and it's really dependent on how many samples you run. Since you have to run standards to kind of calibrate the instrument, if you're only running one sample, the cost in-house could be pretty expensive. If you're running 50, the cost goes down per sample. If you want to send that off to a laboratory, like I mentioned, there's a couple laboratories that offer that. One is local. The Utah State Health Lab is offering that analyses. The agricultural lab is offering it, but I don't know if that's open to the public. Ben, do you know if they accept samples from the public?
Sure.
So the Department of Ag Laboratory is also doing the ELISA test, and I think they're charging anywhere from $125 to $150 per test.
Yeah, it depends. You can maximize your sample cost efficiency if you submit in quantities of 20, and it can be as cheap as $15 a sample. That's the case.
If you're running multiple or a lot of samples. And it's good to keep in mind that you need to reach out to these laboratories, because while they might be able to run immediate samples for an extra cost on the turnaround time, I do know that they consistently run samples on certain days of the week. So you might want to reach out to them if you're going to do any type of monitoring of your source or your drinking water. And then the last analysis that we talked about is a little bit more sophisticated of a test. It costs more to run, and it will only look at certain conjugars of the toxins. And I think Chemtech Ford is available to do that, and the Utah Health Lab. So cyanotoxins in drinking water. While cyanotoxins are an unregulated contaminant, the EPA has put out health-based standards or guidelines for cyanotoxins in drinking water. And you can find that information on the EPA website. But I just want to highlight here that the cyanotoxin levels, it's kind of challenging, these guidelines, because they offer a guideline for young infants, people with a weakened immune system. They offer two different standards or a guideline to follow for health-based conditions. And since they're offering young infants and adults, essentially, typically if you're going to have cyanotoxins in your drinking water, it would be challenging to say, well, we met the microcystin level of 1.6 for adults. However, all of the infants or children under the age of 6, I think is what they classify that as, were impacted by that level. So if you're going to monitor cyanotoxins in your drinking water or manage cyanotoxins in the drinking water, ideally you're going to want to shoot for the most susceptible population and manage it to those levels. UCMR4, there are water systems in Utah right now that are currently required to monitor for cyanotoxins in drinking water under the UCMR4 EPA rule. That's the unregulated contaminants that the EPA puts out every 5 or 6 years, potential contaminants that might have regulation in the future, and they do a subset monitoring prior to that regulation being established. So understanding the risk of cyanotoxins or harmful algal blooms is important to increase public protection. So while recreating in a harmful algal bloom or a bloom that has the potential to produce toxins might be more impactful by, like Ben said, ingesting that in large quantities or concentrations, drinking water systems, you wouldn't be ingesting the cells essentially as if recreating in it, but you could still have potential risks to the toxins, and we'll discuss that a little bit more further on. Impacts to agriculture. I know 2 years ago with the Utah lake bloom, people are concerned about, can they water their vegetables? Can they provide water to their animals? Especially water systems that use surface water for irrigation purposes, or even if you have a holding pond for your irrigation water or for pre-surface water treatment, those holding ponds could potentially be impacted by cyanobacteria growth also. And then what's happening in our environment, what's causing this increase in these type of blooms? Is it an increase in blooms? Is it the new technology for monitoring toxins? Have they always been here? How impactful have they been? All those things we're still learning as we're going in order to increase public protection. So as a public water system, how do you know if your water system's at risk? Well, essentially, if your water system is treating surface water, or you're purchasing surface treated water as a consecutive system, then you could potentially be at risk. Systems that are classified as groundwater under the influence, while that's a very low probability of risk, there is the potential there if your groundwater system is really directly impacted by surface water and there's just a small barrier that's, essentially blocking that water from going to that groundwater source or spring. So 2 years ago, the Division of Drinking Water came up with a vulnerability assessment. What this is it provides public water systems a pathway to determine if they're vulnerable, and provides resources and information on how to monitor not only your source, but your drinking water. This can be found at the habs.utah.gov website. This page on the website is still currently under construction, and we continually focus on improving it. So if you do have issues with the site, please reach out to me or Ben, and we can look at updating information on this site. But I just wanted to highlight where on this site you can find the information to do a vulnerability assessment. And the Division of Drinking Water encourages that you share those assessments with us, and we can help you through that process. So what do you do if you decide that you're at risk? The first step was determine if you're at risk. And then the best thing to do is designate a lead person, 1 or 2 people, to understand the issue and how it impacts your specific utility. Evaluate your vulnerability. Does that mean that you are using surface water in the summer and groundwater in the winter? If it's the type of surface water, is it pulling deep from a reservoir? Are you pulling off of a river inlet that's known to have algal blooms? So evaluate your vulnerability. And the best way to do that is complete the assessment guide or give me a call and I'll help walk you through those steps. And then determine a backup plan if you are vulnerable. Do you have groundwater sources that you can implement if there is some type of harmful algal bloom in your source water? There are many treatment and source water management tools available to public water systems. And like I mentioned, while the concept of cyanobacteria, cyanotoxins is not new to the drinking water industry, technology and knowledge is ever increasing. So these are some resources that are great to look at or start with. And on the habs.utah.gov site, under that tab that we showed you for resources, there's also additional links of resources that you can use to inform yourself on not only how to potentially manage harmful algal blooms at your source, but also through your treatment process. So if there is a harmful algal bloom on your source water, will that potentially impact your drinking water treatment? Maybe, possibly. Essentially, there's 2 different strategies when you're trying to treat water that is under the influence of a harmful algal bloom, which is cyanobacteria that could potentially produce toxins or are currently producing toxins. Essentially, the way that it works is the toxins are within the cell, the algal cell. So if you remove the cell intact, then you're removing the toxins at the same time. However, if you have some type of treatment process that would lyse the cells and release the toxins, you now have to determine how to remove the toxins from the drinking water. While advanced treatment technologies can do a great job at this, and there's research on, or there's resources provided on the best strategies to use in the treatment process, not all treatment processes will remove cyanotoxins. So it's important to know your process and what would be the best way to remove the cells, or if you don't have the capability of removing the cells, to somehow remove the toxins. And once again, this is an unregulated contaminant. However, there are water systems currently monitoring for it under UCMR 4. And as the public knowledge increases and the media, basically presents this as an issue in our drinking water systems, there will be more public pressure and potentially state regulator pressures to monitor for these toxins. So speaking of the public notification, I'm sure many of you are aware, but when Utah Lake has harmful algal blooms all over the news, or even Oregon has it, people will call your water system and ask if it's in their water. What's happening through the water quality program with the local health departments is there's an example of the sign when Ben's program goes out and does some of this monitoring on the beaches and they get the cell counts or the toxins present, there will be signage posted on a water body. This is the actual sign that they'll post. I think this is our the current version. This sign will be posted on a water body. Does that mean your drinking water is impacted? Maybe not, but you're still going to get that phone call. So the best thing to do is inform your staff, help your staff understand the issues, designate the best person to respond to all the public inquiries for your drinking water system, inform your stakeholders. I'm sure they're going to have questions or concerns, and then inform your customers. And one of the best ways to inform your customers on if you're doing any type of monitoring or the risk of your system is you can add information to your consumer confidence report or your webpage. It's better to be prepared to respond to the public when they start asking questions than to have to get back to them with the information. So communication is key. Like I said, talk to your staff, stakeholders. The way that the Division of Water Quality and the Division of Drinking Water, we have fostered a great relationship of communication. Ben hosts a communication meeting once a month where we discuss ways that we can implement communication strategies, improve communication strategies. And just so you're aware, the way that we currently have our communication structure designed is when a HABs incident is reported through the DEQ spill line, that information gets sent out to a few people with the Division of Drinking Water. It gets sent out to our emergency response personnel, Ryan Deering. I am on the list to receive those notifications. However, that's kind of a work in process still, and I don't receive all the notifications yet. But when a spill report goes out through water quality, or if the public calls in, Division of Drinking Water is notified. Typically that would be me. And then Division of Drinking Water has a list of source waters that serve drinking water facilities. And then we can look through that list and then reach out to a drinking water system that might be impacted by a report on that source water. I would suggest if you are a public water system that is treating source waters, reach out to me, Michelle Deras with Division of Drinking Water, and let's make sure that list is accurate so that way and contact information so I can reach out to you directly when there is an incident report in your watershed. When you do receive those reports, Division of Drinking Water recommends that you monitor your drinking water. This might be monitoring the raw water coming into your treatment facility, so that way you can make changes to your treatment process, or monitoring the water you're serving to your citizens, so that way you can make sure that there is no cyanotoxins in the drinking water. And then public notification. If you are monitoring for cyanotoxins in your drinking water and you want to provide public notification of potential toxins in the water, please contact the Division of Drinking Water. We can help you with some of the language for those public notifications and going through those steps. So harmful algal bloom monitoring is challenging. There's not a lot of resources or funds to do it. And based off of my experience of monitoring cyanobacteria in drinking water sources, like Ben said, these organisms are very adaptable. And that being said, they're actually, they do well in non-ideal conditions for green water algae. So if water quality conditions are not ideal, they can still be adaptable to those situations. And sometimes that's a precursor to a bloom. So monitoring the source water, you're not going to be able to monitor all aspects of the water all the time. A lot of people don't have the staff or the knowledge to do it. A lot of public water systems don't have any ownership of the source. So monitoring or treating a source for harmful algal blooms, controlling nutrient loadings is a challenge. Some treatment facilities don't have the capabilities to remove cyanotoxins in the drinking water. So that's a challenge also. Just so you're aware, the State Revolving Fund with the Division of Drinking Water can potentially help with any infrastructure improvements through our loan program. If you do want to reach out to Michael Grange, he's in charge of that program, to find out if there are funding capabilities for your water system. And then funding for analysis, of course. Certain tests are more expensive than others. However, going through that step process that we discussed, where you do the qualitative analysis as a trigger to do more of a quantitative analysis for cyanotoxins in your drinking water, is a good step to take. So like I said, my name is Michelle Deras with the Division of Drinking Water, and I am here to help with harmful algal bloom incidents. And if you want to find out more information, you can go to the habs.utah.gov website or call me directly. Is there any questions?
We do. Looking under the HABs tab on the website, trying to find recommended labs for the ELISA and LCMS/S analysis in Utah, but couldn't find those resources. I did notice an Appendix C was referenced, but couldn't find such an appendix. Any insight there?
So what had happened was about 2 months ago, and I'm not sure if most people noticed this, but our website went over through a big rehab, and a lot of those links were lost. So that's good information to know, and I will make sure that gets put back up on the website through our web team. I don't know how soon that can happen, but feel free to reach out to me at my email, and I can get you that information directly.
Okay. And that is our only question. It's probably worth noting anytime we talk about our website that it's undergoing a major revision, and it's a day-to-day thing about who can find what where. So,
and the HABs website specifically is being held off from being fully updated until the end of HAB season. So we've updated certain parts of it, but not the overarching HABs website. So that will go through another update again, probably in November.
And Ben, you have current HAB data for current blooms on the website, right? You guys are updating
current data
status on current blooms.
Yeah.
So if there is a HAB advisory in your water source, then you can go there and see what's the progress of that.
Yeah. And just to follow up on what Michelle said, if anyone is interested in joining our communication group, it would be great to have a representative from utility just to have that perspective. Michelle used to serve that purpose until we stole her away, but she hasn't replaced herself. So
Michelle is irreplaceable. We know that.
If someone wants to even fill half of one of her shoes,
I don't know about that.
So she's the first person to repeat a webinar, I think.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
But I didn't spell Utah right, so that's
okay.
Well, never mind. She's
If you can spell Utah, you're in.
replaceable.
I just noticed that
on
right
that
now.
level. All right. Well, thank you all. Operators, I'm sure if you're looking for your CEUs, and we get calls about this every time. Another website issue, of which we have a few, are that if you're watching this webinar on the Division of Drinking or the DEQ website, and I tell you to click the CEU link, you won't find it. You have to go into YouTube and click the CEU link to get to it. We'll fix that someday, but that's really a future us's problem, and forget those guys. Thank you for coming. Thank you for listening. Our next webinar will be in July sometime. It'll be at 11 a.m. Travel schedules are making it difficult to sort of lock into which Monday or Tuesday we're going to do that. In fact, today we did it on a Wednesday. So we'll keep you posted. But like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and you will see the updates when we post a new live event. And we'll make sure to get you a live link to that and a notification. So thank you all, and we'll talk to you next month.